Welcome to the place where you can relax. The stories here are boring, but this is what you are here for. Just close your eyes and let literature do her magic. Extract from the Religion of the Ancient Celts by J. McCulloch, first published in 1911. The Irish Mythological Cycle. 3 divine and heroic cycles of myths are known in Ireland, one telling of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the others of Cuchulainn and the Fianns. They are distinct in character and contents, but the gods of the first cycle often help the heroes of the other groups, as the gods of Greece and India assisted the heroes of the epics. We shall see that some of the personages of these cycles may have been known in Gaul. They are remembered in Wales, but in the Highlands, where stories of Cuchulainn are still told, the Tuatha Dé Danann are less known now than in when Bishop Carsul lamented the love of the Highlanders for idle, turbulent, lying, worldly stories concerning the Tuatha Dé Dananns. As the new Achaean religion in Greece and the Vedic sacred books of India regarded the aboriginal gods and heroes as demons and goblins, so did Christianity in Ireland sometimes speak of the older gods there. On the other hand, it was mainly Christian scribes who changed the old mythology into history and made the gods and heroes kings. Doubtless myths already existed, telling of the descent of rulers and people from divinities, just as the Gauls spoke of their descent from Despater, or as the Incas of Peru, the Mikados of Japan, and the kings of Uganda considered themselves offspring of the gods. This is a universal practice, and made it the more easy for Christian chroniclers to transmute myth into history. In Ireland, as elsewhere, myth doubtless told of monstrous races inhabiting the land in earlier days, of the strife of the Aborigines and incomers, and of their gods, though the Aboriginal gods may in some cases have been identified with Celtic gods, or worshipped in their own persons. Many mythical elements may therefore be looked for in the euhemerized chronicles of ancient Ireland. But the chroniclers themselves were but the continuers of a process which must have been at work as soon as the influence of Christianity began to be felt. Their passion, however, was to show the descent of the Irish and the older peoples from the old biblical personages, a process dear to the modern Anglo-Israelite, some of whose arguments are based on the wild romancing of the chroniclers. Various stories were told of the first peopling of Ireland. Bamba, with 2 other daughters of Cain, arrived with 50 women and 3 men, only to die of the plague. 3 fishermen next discovered Ireland, and of the island of Bamba of fair women with hardihood they took possession. Having gone to fetch their wives, they perished in the deluge at Tuath Inba. A more popular account was that of the coming of Cessair, Noah's granddaughter, with her father, husband, a 3rd man, Ladru, the first dead man of Aaron, and 50 damsels. Her coming was a result of the advice of a lame Daya or hand god, but their ship was wrecked, and all save her husband, Fintan, who survived for centuries, perished in the flood. Cessair's ship was less serviceable than her grandparents. Followed the race of Partholin, no wiser one than the other, who increased on the land until plague swept them away, with the exception of Tuan Mac Coril, who after many transformations told the story of Ireland to Finnan centuries after. The survival of Fintan and Tuan, doubles of each other, was an invention of the chroniclers to explain the survival of the history of colonists who had all perished. Keating, on the other hand, rejecting the sole survivor theory as contradictory to scripture, suggests that aerial demons, followers of the invaders, revealed all to chroniclers, unless indeed they found engraved with an iron pen and lead in the rocks. 200 years before Partholin's coming, the Fomorians had arrived, and they and their chief Sickle Grisenkos fought Partholin at Mag Itha, where they were defeated. Sickle was footless, and some of his host had but 1 arm and 1 leg. They were demons, according to chroniclers, and descendants of the luckless Ham. Nennius makes Partholin and his men the first Scots who came from Spain to Ireland. The next arrivals were the people of Nemd, who returned to Spain, whence they came Nennius, or died to a man, Tuan. They also were descendants of the inevitable Noah, and their soldier in Ireland was much disturbed by the Fomorians, who had recovered from their defeat and finally overpowered the Nemedians after the death of Nemd. From Tory Island, the Fomorians ruled Ireland and forced the Nemedians to pay them annually on the eve of Samhain, November 1st. 2/3 of their corn and milk and of the children born during the year. If the Fomorians are gods of darkness, or preferably aboriginal deities, the tribute must be explained as a dim memory of sacrifice offered at the beginning of winter, when the powers of darkness and blight are in the ascendant. The Fomorians had a tower of glass in Tory Island. This was one day seen by the Milesians, to whom appeared on its battlements what seemed to be men. A year after they attacked the tower and were overwhelmed in the sea, from the survivors of a previously wrecked vessel of their fleet are descended the Irish. Another version makes the Nemedians the assailants. 30 of them survived their defeat, some of them going to Scotland or Man, the Britons, some to Greece, to return as the Firbolgs, some to the north, where they learned magic and returned as the Tuatha Dé Danann. The Firbolgs, men of bags, resenting their ignominious treatment by the Greeks, escaped to Ireland. They included the Firbolgs proper, the Firdominant and the Gallioan. The Fomorians are called their gods, and this, with the contemptuous epithets bestowed on them, may point to the fact that the Firbolgs were the pre-Celtic folk of Ireland and the Fomorians their divinities, hostile to the gods of the Celts or regarded as dark deities. The Firbolgs are vassals of Ailill and Medb, and with the Firdominant and Gallioan are hostile to Cuchulainn and his men, just as Fomorians were to the Tuatha Dé Danann. The strifes of races and of their gods are inextricably confused. The Tuatha Dé Danann arrived from heaven, an idea in keeping with their character as beneficent gods, but later legend told how they came from the north. They reached Ireland on Beltane, shrouded in a magic mist, and finally, after one or in other accounts, 2 battles, defeated the Firbolgs and Fomorians at Magchurd. The older story of one battle may be regarded as a euhemerized account of the seeming conflict of nature powers. The first battle is described in the 15th to 16th century MS, and is referred to in a 15th century account of the second battle, full of archaic reminiscences, and composed from various earlier documents. The Firbolgs, defeated in the first battle, joined the Fomorians after great losses. Meanwhile, Nuada, leader of the Tuatha Dé Danann, lost his hand, and as no king with a blemish could sit on the throne, the crown was given to Bres, son of the Fomorian Elitha, and his sister Eri, a woman of the Tuatha Dé Danann. One day Eri spied a silver boat speeding to her across the sea. From it stepped forth a magnificent hero, and without delay the pair, like the lovers in Theocritus, rejoiced in their wedlock. The hero Elitha foretold the birth of Eri's son, so beautiful that he would be a standard by which to try all beautiful things. He gave her his ring, but she was to part with it only to one whose finger it should fit. This was her child Bres, and by this token he was later, as an exile, recognized by his father, and obtained his help against the Tuatha Dé Danann. Like other wonderful children, Bres grew twice as quickly as any other child until he was 7. Though Elitha and Eri are brother and sister, she is among the Tuatha Dé Danann. There is a usual inconsistency of myth here, and in other accounts of Fomorian and Tuatha Dé Danann unions. The latter had just landed, but already had united in marriage with the Fomorians. This inconsistency escaped the chroniclers, but it points to the fact that both were divine, not human, and that, though in conflict, they united in marriage as members of hostile tribes often do. The second battle took place 27 years after the first, on Samhain. It was fought like the first on the plain of Magtord, though later accounts made one battle take place at Magtord in Mayo, the other at Magtord in Sligo. Inconsistently, the conquering Tuatha Dé Danann in the interval, while Bres is their king, must pay tribute imposed by the Fomorians. Obviously, in older accounts, this tribute must have been imposed before the first battle and have been its cause. But why should gods, like the Tuatha Dé Danann, ever have been in subjection? This remains to be seen, But the answer probably lies in parallel myths of subjection or death of divinities like Ishtar, Adonis, Persephone, and Osiris. Breasts having exacted a tribute of the milk of all hornless dun cows. The cows of Ireland were passed through fire and smeared with ashes, a myth based perhaps on the Beltane fire ritual. The avaricious breast was satirized, and naught but decay was on him from that hour. And when Nuada, having recovered, claimed the throne, he went to collect an army of the Fomorians, who assembled against the Tuatha Dé Danann. In the battle, Indech wounded Agma, and Balor slew Nuada, but was mortally wounded by Lug. Thereupon the Fomorians fled to their own region. The Tuatha Dé Danann remained masters of Ireland until the coming of the Milesians, so named from an eponymous Mile, son of Bile, if, having been sent to reconnoiter, was slain, and the Milesians now invaded Ireland in force. In spite of a mist raised by the Druids, they landed, and, having met the 3 princes who slew it, demanded instant battle or surrender the land. The princes agreed to abide by the decision of the Milesian poet Emergent, who bade his friends re-embark and retire for the distance of 9 waves. If they could then effect a landing, Ireland was theirs. A magic storm was raised, which wrecked many of their ships, but Emergent recited verses, fragments, perhaps, of some old ritual, and overcame the dangers. After their defeat, the survivors of the Tuatha Dé Danann retired into the hills to become a fairy folk, and the Milesians, the Goidels or Scots, became ancestors of the Irish. Throughout the long story of the conquest of Ireland, there are many reduplications, the same incidents being often ascribed to different personages. Different versions of similar occurrences, based on older myths and traditions, may already have been in existence, and ritual practices, dimly remembered, required explanation. In the hands of the chroniclers, writing history with a purpose and combining their information with little regard to consistency, all this was reduced to a more or less connected narrative. At the hands of the prosaic chroniclers, divinity passed from the gods, though traces of it still linger. Ye are gods, and behold, ye shall die, and the waves be upon you at last. In the darkness of time, in the deeps of the years, in the changes of things, ye shall sleep as a slain man sleeps, and the world shall forget you for kings. From the analytic point of view, the Fomorians are sea demons or pirates, their name being derived from Muir, sea, while they are descended along with other monstrous beings from them. Professor R.H. Carrot-Wyss, while connecting the name with Welsh for giant, Gaelic famhair, derives the name from Fo, under, and Muir, and regards them as submarine beings. Dr. McBain connected them with the fierce powers of the Western Sea personified, like the Muriartak, a kind of sea hag of a Finn ballad. But this association of the Fomorians with the ocean may be the result of a late folk etymology, which wrongly derived their name from Muir, the Celtic experience of the Lachlaners or Norsemen, with whom the Fomorians are associated, would aid the conception of them as sea pirates of a more or less demoniacal character. Dr. Stokes connects the second syllable more with mare and nightmare from Moro, and regards them as subterranean as well as submarine, but the more probable derivation is that of Zimmer and Darbois, from Fo and Morio more great, which would thus agree with the tradition which regarded them as giants. They were probably beneficent gods of the Aborigines, whom the Celtic conquerors regarded as generally evil, perhaps equating them with the dark powers already known to them. They were still remembered as gods, and are called champions of the Cid, like the Tuatha Dé Danann. Thus King Brest sought to save his life by promising that the kine of Ireland would always be in milk, then that the men of Ireland would reap every quarter, and finally by revealing the lucky days for plowing, sowing, and reaping. Only an autochthonous god could know this, and the story is suggestive of the true nature of the Fomorians. The hostile character attributed to them is seen from the fact that they destroyed corn, milk, and fruit. But in Ireland, as elsewhere, this destructive power was deprecated by begging them not to destroy corn nor milk in Erin beyond their fair tribute. Tribute was also paid to them on Samhain, the time when the powers of blight feared by men are in the ascendant. Again, the kingdom of Balor, their chief, is still described as a kingdom of cold. But when we remember that a similar tribute was paid to Cruach, a god of fertility, and that after the conquest of OldAethelred Danann, they also were regarded as hostile to agriculture, we realize that the Fomorians must have been aboriginal gods of fertility, whom the conquering Celts regarded as hostile to them and their gods. Similarly, in folk belief, the beneficent corn spirit has sometimes a sinister and destructive aspect. Thus, the stories of tribute would be distorted reminiscences of the ritual of gods of the soil, differing little in character from that of the similar Celtic divinities. What makes it certain that the Fomorians were aboriginal gods is that they are found in Ireland before the coming of the early colonist Partholin. They were the gods of pre-Celtic folk. Firbolgs, Firdomnin, and Galleon 186, all of them in Ireland before the OldAethelred Danann arrived, and all of them regarded as slaves, spoken with the utmost contempt. Another possibility, however, ought to be considered. As the Celtic gods were local in character, and as groups of tribes would frequently be hostile to other groups, the Fomorians may have been local gods of a group at enmity with another group, worshipping the OldAethelred Danann. The strife of Fomorians and OldAethelred Danann suggests the dualism of all nature religions. Demons or giants or monsters strive with God in Hindu, Greek, and Teutonic mythology, and in Persia the primitive dualism of beneficent and hurtful powers of nature became an ethical dualism, the eternal opposition of good and evil. The sun is vanquished by cloud and storm, but shines forth again in vigor. Vegetation dies, but undergoes a yearly renewal. So in myth the immortal gods are wounded and slain in strife. But we must not push too far the analogy of the apparent strife of the elements and the wars of the gods. The one suggested the other, especially where the gods were elemental powers. But myth-making man easily developed the suggestion gods were like men and could never get enough of fectin. The Celts knew of divine combats before their arrival in Ireland, and their own hostile powers were easily assimilated to the hostile gods of the Aborigines. The principal Fomorians are described as kings. Elithel was son of Net, described by Cormac as a battle god of the heathen Gael, i.e., he is one of the OldAethelred Danann, and has as wives two war goddesses, Bab and Nemain. Thus he resembles the Fomorian Tethra, whose wife is a Bab or battle crow, preying on the slain. Elith's name, connected with words meaning knowledge, suggests that he was an aboriginal culture god. In the genealogies, Fomorians and OldAethelred Danann are inextricably mingled. Bress's temporary position as king of the OldAethelred may reflect some myth of the occasional supremacy of the powers of blight. Want and niggardliness characterize his reign, and after his defeat, a better state of things prevails. Bress's consort was Bridget, and their son Rawdon, sent to spy on the OldAethelred Danann, was slain. His mother's wailing for him was the first mourning wail ever heard in Erin. Another god, Indek, was son of Dea Dumnu, a Fomorian goddess of the deep, i.e. of the underworld, and probably also fertility, who may hold a position among the Fomorians similar to that of Danu among the OldAethelred Danann. Indek was slain by Ogma, who himself died of wounds received from his adversary. Balor had a consort Cephalin, whose venom killed Dagda. His one eye had become evil by contact with the poisonous fumes of a concoction which his father's druids were preparing. The eyelid required 4 men to raise it. When his evil eye destroyed all on whom its glance fell. In this way, Balor would have slain Lug at Magtord, but the god at once struck the eye with a sling stone and slew him. Balor, like the Greek Medusa, is perhaps a personification of the evil eye, so much feared by the Celts. Helpful influences and magical charms avert it. Hence Lug, a beneficent god, destroys Balor's maleficence. Tethra, with Balor and Elitha, ruled over Erin at the coming of the OldAethelred Danann. From a phrase used in the story of Conla's visit to Elysium, "Thou art a hero of the men of Tethra," M. Darwa assumes that Tethra was ruler of Elysium, which he makes one with the land of the dead. The passage, however, bears a different interpretation, and though a Fomorian, Tethra, a god of war, might be regarded as lord of all warriors, Elysium was not the land of the dead, and when M. Darwa equates Tethra with Kronos, who after his defeat became ruler of a land of dead heroes, the analogy, like other analogies with Greek mythology, is misleading. He also equates Bres as temporary king of the Tuatha Dé Danann with Kronos, king of heaven in the Age of Gold. Kronos, again slain by Zeus, is parallel to Balor slain by his grandson Lug. Tethra, Bres, and Balor are the separate fragments of one god equivalent to Kronos, yet their personalities are quite distinct. Each race works out its mythology for itself, and while parallels are inevitable, we should not allow these to override the actual myths as they have come down to us. Professor R.H. Y. S. makes Bile, ancestor of the Milesians who came from Spain, a Goidelic counterpart of the Gaulish Despater, lord of the dead, from whom the Gauls claim descent. But Bile, neither a Fomorian nor the Tuatha Dé Danann, is an imaginary and shadowy creation. Bile is next equated with Brythonic Beli, assumed to be consort of Don, whose family are equivalent to the Tuatha Dé Danann. Beli was a mythic king whose reign was a kind of golden age, and if he was father of Don's children, which is doubtful, Bile would then be father of the Tuatha Dé Danann. But he is ancestor of the Milesians, their opponents according to the annalists. Beli is also equated with Elitha, and since Don, reputed consort Beli, was grandmother of Lu, equated with Irish Lug. Grandson of Balor, Balor is equivalent to Beli, whose name is regarded by Professor Arcaritas as related etymologically to Balor's. Bile, Balor, and Elitha are thus Goidelic equivalents of the shadowy Beli. But they also are quite distinct personalities, nor are they ever hinted at as ancestral gods of the Celts or gods of the gloomy underworld. In Celtic belief, the underworld was probably a fertile region and a place of light, nor were its gods harmful and evil, as Balor was. On the whole, the Fomorians came to be regarded as the powers of nature in its hostile aspect. They personified blight, winter, darkness, and death, before which men trembled, yet were not wholly cast down, since the immortal gods of growth and light, rulers of the bright otherworld, were on their side and fought against their enemies. Year by year the gods suffered deadly harm, but returned as conquerors to renew the struggle once more. Myths spoke of this as having happened once for all, but it went on continuously. Gods were immortal and only seemed to die. The strife was represented in ritual, since men believe that they can aid the gods by magic, rite, or prayer. Why, then, do hostile Fomorians and Tuatha Dé Danann intermarry? This happens in all mythologies, and it probably reflects, in the divine sphere, what takes place among men. Hostile peoples carry off each the other's women, or they have periods of friendliness and consequent intermarriage. Man makes his gods in his own image, and the problem is best explained by facts like these, exaggerated no doubt by the Irish annalists. The Tuatha Dé Danann, in spite of their euhemerization, are more than human. In the north, where they learned magic, they dwelled in 4 cities, from each of which they brought magical treasure: the Stone of Fowl, which roared under every king, Lug's unconquerable spear, Nuada's irresistible sword, the Dagda's inexhaustible cauldron. But they are more than wizards or druids. They are reborn as mortals. They are a divine world of their own. They interfere in and influence human affairs. The euhemerists did not go far enough, and more than once their divinity is practically acknowledged. When the Fian Coilt and a woman of the Tuatha Dé Danann appear before S. Patrick, he asks, "Why is she youthful and beautiful, while you are old and wrinkled?" And Coilt replies, "She is of the Tuatha Dé Danann, who are unfading and whose duration is perennial. I am of the sons of Milesius, that are perishable and fade away." After their conversion, the Celts, sons of Milesius, thought that the gods still exist in the hollow hills, their former dwellings in sanctuaries or in far-off islands, still caring for their former worshippers. This tradition had its place with that which made them a race of men conquered by the Milesians, the victory of Christianity over paganism, and its gods having been transmuted into a strife of races by the Euhemerists. The new faith, not the people, conquered the old gods. The Tuatha De Danann became the Deo Insidhi of fairy folk, still occasionally called by their old name, just as individual fairy kings or queens bear the names of the ancient gods. The Euhemerists gave the Fomorians a monstrous and demoniac character, which they did not always give to Tuatha De Danann. In this continuing the old tradition that Fomorians were hostile and the Tuatha De Danann beneficent and mild. The mythological cycle is not a complete body of divinity. Its apparent completeness results from the chronological order of the annalists. Fragments of other myths are found in the Dinsenkas. Others exist as romantic tales, and we have no reason to believe that all the old myths have been preserved. But enough remains to show the true nature of the Tuatha De Danann. Their supernatural character, their powers, their divine and unfailing food and drink, their mysterious and beautiful abode, in their contents, their personages, in the actions that are described in them, the materials of the mythological cycle, show how widely it differs from the Cuchulainn and Finn cycles. The white radiance of eternity suffuses it. The heroic cycles, magical and romantic as they are, belong far more to earth and time. Are you still awake? You must be tougher than this. Let us see if you can handle another extract. Good night if you fall asleep. The Tuatha De Danann. The meaning formerly given to Tuatha De Danann was the men of science who were gods, Danann being here connected with Dan, knowledge. But the true meaning is the tribes or folk of the goddess Danu, which agrees with the cognates Tuatha, or Ferde, tribes or men of the goddess. The name was given to the group, though Danu had only 3 sons, Brian, Ukar, and Ukarbar. Hence the group is also called Fur Trindia, men of the 3 gods. The equivalents in Welsh story of Danu and her folk are Dan and her children. We have seen that though they are described as kings and warriors by the annalists, traces of their divinity appear. In the Cuchulainn cycle, they are supernatural beings and sometimes demons, helping or harming men, and in the Finn cycle, all these characteristics are ascribed to them. But the theory which prevailed most is that which connected them with the hills or mounds, the last resting places of the mighty dead. Some of these bore their names, while other beings were also associated with the mounds, Cid, Fomorians and Milesian chiefs, heroes of the sagas, or those who had actually been buried in them. Legend told how, after the defeat of the gods, the mounds were divided among them, the method of division varying in different versions. In an early version, the Tuatha De Danann are immortal and the Dagda divides the Cid. But in a poem of Flan Manistrec, O.B., they are mortals and die. Now follows a regular chronology giving the dates of their reigns and their deaths, as in the poem of Gilla Comain, 11th century. Hence another legend told how, Dagda being dead, Ba Dirge divided the Cid. Yet even here Manannan is said to have conferred immortality upon the Tuatha De Danann. The old pagan myths had shown that gods might die, while in ritual their representatives were slain, and this may have been the starting point of the euhemerizing process. But the divinity of the Tuatha De Danann is still recalled. Eaked O'Flynn, 10th century, doubtful whether they are men or demons, concludes, though I have treated of these deities in order, yet have I not adored them. Even in later times they were still thought of as God in exile, a view which appears in romantic tales and sagas existing side by side with the notices of the annalists. They were also regarded as fairy kings and queens, and yet fairies of a different order from those of ordinary tradition. They are fairies or sprites with corporeal forms, endowed with immortality, and yet also de Tyranny or side worshipped by the folk before the coming of S. Patrick. Even the saint and several bishops were called by the fair pagan daughters of King Logair. First side, men of the Cid, that is, gods. The Cid were named after the names of the Tuatha Dé Danann who reigned in them, but the tradition being localized in different places, several mounds were sometimes connected with one god. The Cid were marvelous underground palaces, full of strange things, and thither favored mortals might go for a time or forever. In this they correspond exactly to the oversea Elysium, the divine land. But why were the Tuatha Dé Danann associated with the mounds? If fairies or an analogous race of beings were already in pagan times connected with hills or mounds, gods now regarded as fairies would be connected with them. Dr. Joyce and Oakery think that an older race of aboriginal gods, or Cid folk, preceded the Tuatha Dé in the mounds. These may have been the Fomorians, the champions of the Cid, while in Mesca Olad the Tuatha they go to the underground dwellings and speak with the side already there. We do not know that the fairy creed as such existed in pagan times, but the side and the Tuatha Dé Danann were once distinct. They were gradually assimilated. Thus the Dagda is called king of the side, Ed Ubrad and his daughters, Fan and Libin and Labraid, Libin's husband, are called side, and Manan and his Fan's consort. Labraid's island, like the Cid of Midder in the land to which women of the side invite Conla, differs but little from the usual divine Elysium, while Midder, one of the side, is associated with the Tuatha Dé Danann. The side are once said to be female, and are frequently supernatural women who run away or marry mortals. Thus they may be a reminiscence of old earth goddesses. But they are not exclusively female, since they are kings of the side, and as a name for a side, men of the side shows, while Patrick and his friends were taken for Cid folk. The formation of the legend was also aided by the old cult of the gods on heights, some of them sepulchral mounds, and now occasionally sites of Christian churches. The Irish god Sen Cruach and his Welsh equivalent Pencruach, whose name survives in Penacrucium, have names meaning chief or head of the mound. Other mounds or hills had also a sacred character. Hence gods worshipped at mounds, dwelling or revealing themselves there, still lingered in the haunted spots. They became fairies or were associated with the dead buried in the mounds, as fairies also have been, or were themselves thought to have died and been buried there. The haunting of the mounds by the old gods is seen in a prayer of S. Columbus, who begs God to dispel this host, i.e. the old gods, around the cairns at Rhiagnef. An early MS also tells how the Milesians allotted the underground part of Erin to the Tuatha Dé, who now retire within the hills. In other words, they were gods of the hills worshipped by the Milesians on hills. But, as we shall see, the gods dwelt elsewhere than in hills. Tumuli may already in pagan times have been pointed out as tombs of gods who died in myth or ritual, like the tombs of Zeus in Crete and of Osiris in Egypt. Again, fairies in some aspects are ghosts of the dead and haunt tumuli. Hence, when gods became fairies, they would do the same. And once they were thought of as dead kings, any notable tumuli would be pointed out as theirs, since it's a law in folk belief to associate tumuli or other structures not with the dead or with their builders, but with supernatural or mythical or even historical personages. If side ever meant ghosts, it would be easy to call the dead gods by this name and connect them with the places of the dead. Many strands went to the weaving of the later conception of the gods, but there still hung around them an air of mystery, and the belief that they were a race of men was never consistent with itself. Danu gave her name to the whole group of gods, and is called their mother like the Egyptian Neith or the Semitic Ishtar. In the Annals, she is daughter of Dagda and has 3 sons. She may be akin to the goddess Anu, whom Cormac describes as Mater Deorum Hibernensium. It was while she nursed the gods. From her name he derives Anna, plenty, and 2 hills in Kerry are called the Paps of Anu. Thus, as a goddess of plenty, Danu or Anu may have been an early Earth Mother, and what may be a dim memory of Anu in Leicestershire confirms this view. A cave on the Dane Hills is called Black Anna's Bower, and she is said to have been a savage woman who devoured human victims. Earth goddesses usually have human victims, and Anu would be no exception. In the cult of Earth divinities, Earth and Underearth are practically identical, while Earth goddesses like Demeter and Persephone were associated with the underworld, the dead being Demeter's folk. The fruits of the earth with their roots below the surface are then gifts of the earth or under-earth goddess. This may have been the case with Danu, for in Celtic belief the gifts of civilization came from the underworld or from the gods. Professor R.H.YS finds the name Anu in the Data Anonaridi, Cherry of Anu, in an inscription from Vaucluse, and the identification is perhaps established by the fact that goddesses of fertility were drawn to the fields in a vehicle. Cormac also mentions Buanan as mother and nurse of heroes, perhaps a goddess worshipped by heroes. Danu is also identified with Bridget, goddess of knowledge dawn, perhaps through a folk etymology. She was worshipped by poets, and had two sisters of the same name connected with leechcraft and smith work. They are duplicates or local forms of Bridget, a goddess of culture and of poetry, so much loved by the Celts. She is thus the equivalent of the Gaulish goddess, equated with Minerva by Caesar, and found on inscriptions as Minerva Belisama and Brigindo. She is the Dea Brigantia of British inscriptions. One of the seats of her worship was the land of the Brigantes, of whom she was eponymous goddess, and her name, Cfir Brig, power or craft, Welsh brie, honor, renown, suggests her high functions, but her popularity is seen in the continuation of her personality and cult in those of S. Bridget, at whose shrine in Kildare sacred fire, which must not be breathed on or approached by a male, was watched daily by 19 nuns in turn, and on the 20th day by the saint herself. Similar sacred fires were kept up in other monasteries, and they point to the old cult of the goddess of fire, the nuns being successors of the virgin priesthood, like the Vestals, priestesses of Vesta. As has been seen, the goddesses Belisama and Sol, probably goddesses of fire, resemble Bridget in this. But Bridget, like Vesta, was at once a goddess of fire and of fertility, as her connection with Candlemas and certain ritual survivals also suggest. In the Hebrides on S, Bride's Day, Candlemas Eve, women dress a sheaf of oats in female clothes and set it with a club in a basket called Bride's Bed. Then they called Bride is Come, Bride is Welcome, or a bed was made of corn and hay with candles burning beside it, and bride was invited to come as her bed was ready. If the mark of the club was seen in the ashes, this was an omen of a good harvest and a prosperous year. It is also noteworthy that if cattle cropped the grass near us, Bridget's shrine, next day it was as luxuriant as ever. Bridget, or goddesses with similar functions, was regarded by the Celts as an early teacher of civilization, inspirer of the artistic, poetic, and mechanical faculties, as well as a goddess of fire and fertility. As such, she far excelled her sons, gods of knowledge. She must have originated in the period when the Celts worshipped goddesses rather than gods, and when knowledge, leechcraft, agriculture, inspiration, were women's rather than men's. She had a female priesthood, and men were perhaps excluded from her cult, as the tabooed shrine at Kildare suggests. Perhaps her fire was fed from sacred oak wood, for many shrines of S. Bridget were built under oaks, doubtless displacing pagan shrines of the goddess. As a goddess, Bridget is more prominent than Danu, also a goddess of fertility, even though Danu is mother of the gods. Other goddesses remembered in tradition are Clina and Vera, celebrated in fairy and witch lore, the former perhaps akin to a river goddess Clota, the Clotoida, a fountain nymph of the continental Celts, the latter under her alternative name Dira, perhaps a form of a goddess of Gaul, Dirona. Ain, one of the great fairy queens of Ireland, has her seat at Knockaney in Limerick, where rites connected with her former cult are still performed for fertility on Midsummer Eve. If they were neglected, she and her troops performed them, according to local legend. She is thus an old goddess of fertility, whose cult, even at a festival in which gods were latterly more prominent, is still remembered She is also associated with the waters as a water nymph captured for a time as a fairy bride by the Earl of Desmond, but older legends connect her with the Cid. She was daughter of Eogible, king of the Cid of Knockainey, the grass on which was annually destroyed at Samhain by his people. Because it had been taken from them, its rightful owners, Oilo Alum and Furchas, resolved to watch the Cid on Samhain Eve. They saw Eogible and Ain emerge from it. Furchas killed Eogible, and Oilil tried to outrage Ain, who bit the flesh from his ear, hence his name of Bare Ear. In this legend, we see how earlier gods of fertility come to be regarded as hostile to growth. Another story tells of the love of Aelin, Eogible's son, for Manannan's wife, and that of Ain for Manannan. Ain offered her favors to the god if he would give his wife to her brother, and the complicated bit of romance, as Patrick calls it, was thus arranged. Although the Irish god are warriors, and there are special war gods, yet war goddesses are more prominent, usually as a group of three: Morrigan, Nemen, and Machu. A fourth, Bab, sometimes takes the place of one of these, or is identical with Morrigan, or her name, like that of Morrigan, may be generic. Bab means a scald crow, under which form the war goddesses appeared, probably because these birds were seen near the slain. She is also called Badcatha, Battle Bab, and is thus the equivalent of Athabadua, or more probably Cathabodua, mentioned in an inscription from Haute Savoy, while this, as well as person names like Badaginos, shows that a goddess Badja was known to the Gauls. The Bab or battle crow is associated with the Fomorian Tethra, but Bad herself is consort of a war god Net, one of the Tuatha Danann, who may be the equivalent of Neton, mentioned in Spanish inscriptions and equated with Mars. Elsewhere, Nemen is Net's consort, and she may be the Nemetona of inscriptions, e.g. at Bath, the consort of Mars. Cormac calls Net and Nemen a venomous couple, which we may well believe them to have been. To Machu were devoted the heads of slain enemies. Machu is masked, but she, according to the annalists, was slain at Magtord, though she reappears in the Cuchulainn saga as the Machu whose ill treatment led to debility of the Ulstermen. The name Morrigan may mean Great Queen, though Dr. Stokes, connecting more with the same syllable in Fomorian, explains it as Nightmare Queen. She works great harm to Fomorians at Magtord, and afterwards proclaims a victory to the hills, rivers, and fairy hosts, uttering also a prophecy of the evils to come at the end of time. She reappears prominently in the Cuchulainn saga, hostile to the hero because he rejects her love, yet aiding the hosts of Ulster and the Brown Bull, and in the end try and prevent the hero's death. The prominent position of these goddesses must be connected with the fact that women went out to war, a custom said had been stopped by a damnant at his mother's request, and that many prominent heroines of the heroic cycles are warriors, like the British Boudica, whose name may be connected with Budi, victory. Specific titles were given to such classes of female warriors, Bangisgedeg, Banfianity, etc. But it is possible that these goddesses were at first connected with fertility, their functions changing with the growing warlike tendencies of the Celts. Their number recalls that of the threefold matries, and possibly the change in their character is hinted in the Romano-British inscription at Benwell to the Lamius Tribus, since Morrigan's name is Gloss Lamia. She is also identified with Anu, and is mistress of Dagda, an earth god, and with Bab and others expels the Fomorians when they destroyed the agricultural produce of Ireland. Probably the Scald Crow was at once the symbol and the incarnation of the war goddesses, who resemble the Norse Valkyries, appearing sometimes as crows, and the Greek Keris, bird-like beings which drank the blood of the slain. It is also interesting to note that Bab, who is the character of a prophetess of evil, is often identified with a washer at the ford, whose presence indicates death to him whose armor or garments she seems to cleanse. The Matries, goddesses of fertility, do not appear by name in Ireland, but the triplication of such goddesses as Morrigan and Bridget, the threefold name of Dagda's wife, or the fact that Arm, Danu, and Buanan are called mothers, while Buanan's name is sometimes rendered good mother, may suggest that such group goddesses were not unknown. Later legend knows of white women who assist in spinning, or 3 hags with power over nature, or, as in the Battle of Ventry, of 3 supernatural women who fall in love with Conqueror, aid him in fight, and heal his wounds. In this document, and elsewhere is mentioned the Cid of the White Women. Goddesses of fertility are usually goddesses of love, and the prominence given to females among the side, the fact that they're often called behind white women, like fairies who represent the Dmitries elsewhere, and that they freely offer their love to mortals, may connect them with this group of goddesses. Again, when the Milesians arrived in Ireland, 3 kings of the OldAethelred had wives called Eriu, Bamba, and Fotla, who begged that Ireland should be called after them. This was granted, but only Eriu Erin remained in general use. The story is an ideological myth explaining the names of Ireland, but the 3 wives may be a group like the Dmitries, guardians of the land which took its name from them. Brian, Ukar, and Ucharba, who give a title to the whole group, are called Trididanan, the 3 gods, sons of Danu, or, again, gods of dawn, knowledge, perhaps as a result of a folk etymology associating Dan with their mother's name Danu. Various attributes are personified as their descendants, wisdom being son of all 3. Though some of these attributes may have been actual gods, especially Echne or wisdom, yet it is more probable that the personification is a result of the subtleties of bardic science, of which similar examples occur. On the other hand, the fact that Echne is the son of 3 brothers may recall some early practice of polyandry which instances are met within the sagas. Darbois suggested that Ukar and Ucharba are mere duplicates of Brian, who usually takes the leading place, and he identifies them with 3 kings of the OldAethelred reigning at the time of the Milesian invasion, Macquill, Macsect, and Macgrain, so-called according to Keating, because of Hazel, Call, the plough, sect, and the son, Grian, were gods of worship to them. Both groups are grandsons of Dagda, and Darbois regards the second group as also triplicates of one god, because their wives Fotla, Bamba, and Eriu all bear names of Ireland itself, are personifications of the land, and thus may be reduced to unity. While this reasoning is ingenious, it should be remembered that we must not lay too much stress upon Irish divine genealogies. While each group of 3 may have been similar local gods associated at a later time as brothers, their separate personality is suggested by the fact that the Tuatha Dé Danann are called after them the men of the 3 gods, and their supremacy appears in the incident of Dagda, Lug, and Ogma consulting them before the fight at Mag Tuired, a natural proceeding if they were gods of knowledge or destiny. The brothers are said to have slain the god Cian, and to have been themselves slain by Lug, and on this seems to have been based the story of the children of Tuireann, in which they perished through their exertions in obtaining the Eric demanded by Lug. Here they are sons of Tuireann, but more usually their mother Danu or Bridget is mentioned. Another son of Bridget's was Ogma, master of poetry and inventor of Ogham writing, the word being derived from his name. It is more probable that Ogma's name is a derivative from some word signifying speech or writing, and that the connection with Ogham may be a mere folk etymology. Ogma appears as a champion of the gods, a position given him perhaps from the primitive custom of rousing the warrior's emotions by eloquent speeches before a battle. Similarly, the Babylonian Marduk, seer of the gods, was also their champion in fight. Ogma fought and died at Mag Tuired, but in other accounts he survives, captures Tethra's sword, goes on the quest for Dagda's harp, and is given a Cid after the Milesian victory. Ogma's counterpart in Gaul is Ogmios, a Heracles and a god of eloquence, thus bearing the dual character of Ogma, while Ogma's epithet Griananek, of the smiling countenance, recalls Lucian's account of the smiling face of Ogmios. Ogma's high position is a result of the admiration of bardic eloquence among the Celts, whose loquacity was proverbial, and to him its origin was doubtless ascribed, as well as that of poetry. The genealogists explain his relationship to the other divinities in different ways. But these confusions may result from the fact that gods had more than one name, of which the annalists made separate personalities. Most usually Agma is called Bridget's son. Her functions were like his own, but in spite of the increasing supremacy of gods over goddesses, he never really eclipsed her. Among other culture gods were those associated with the arts and crafts. The development of Celtic art in metalwork necessitating the existence of gods of this art. Such a god is Goibniu, eponymous god of smiths, old Iargoba smith, and a divine craftsman at the Battle of Magtord, making spears which never failed to kill. Smiths have everywhere been regarded as uncanny, a tradition surviving from the first introduction of metal among those hitherto accustomed to stone weapons and tools. Patrick prayed against the spells of women, smiths, and druids, and it is thus not surprising to find that Goibniu had a reputation for magic, even among Christians, a spell for making butter. In an 8th century MS preserved at Esgol, appeals to his science. Curiously enough, Goibniu is also connected with the culinary art and myth, and, like Hephaestos, prepares the feast of the gods, while his ale preserves their immortality. The elation produced by heady liquors cause them to be regarded as draughts of immortality, like soma, halma, or nectar. Goibniu survives in tradition as the Gobin Sar, to whom the building of round towers is ascribed. Another god of craft was Craden the Brazier, Iarcerd, artificer, cf. Scott's Caird, tinker, who assisted in making a silver hand for Noata, and supplied with magical rapidity parts of the weapons used at Magtord. According to the annalists, he was drowned while bringing golden ore from Spain. Luctine, god of carpenters, provided spear handles for the battle, and with marvelous skill flung them into the sockets of the spearheads. Dionsect, whose name may mean swift in power, was god of medicine, and, with Craden's help, fashioned a silver hand for Nuada. His son Mayak replaced this by a magic restoration of the real hand, and in jealousy his father slew him, a version of the American formula of the jealous master. 365 herbs grew from his grave, and were arranged according to their properties by his sister Airmed, but Dionsect again confused them, so that no one knows their proper cures. At the second battle of Magtord, Dionsect presided over a healing well containing magic herbs. These and the power of spells caused the mortally wounded who were placed in it to recover. Hence it was called the Spring of Health. Dionsect, associated with a healing well, may be cognate with Grannos. He is also referred to in the Gaul MS, where his healing powers are extolled. An early chief of the gods is Dagda, who, in the story of the Battle of Magtord, is said to be so called because he promised to do more than all the other gods together. Hence they said, "It is thou art the good hand, Dagda." The Koyer Ammon explains Dagda as fire of God, Dag and Da. The true derivation is from Dagos, good, and Devos, God, though Dr. Stokes considers Dagda as connected with Dag, whence Dagda, cunning. Dagda is also called Sarah, a word perhaps derived from Kar and connected with Latsaris, creator, and other names of his are Rudolfessa, Lord of great knowledge, and Eakade Alathair, great father. For a great father to the Tuatha De Danann was he. He is also called a beautiful god, and the principal god of the pagans. After the battle he divides the Brugs or sit among the gods, but his son Aengus, having been omitted by a stratagem, succeeded in ousting his father from his Cid, over which he now himself reigned to 70, possibly the survival of an old myth telling of a superseding of Dagda's cult by that of Aengus, a common enough occurrence in all religions. In another version, Dagda being dead, Bod Dirge divides the Cid, and Manannan makes Adatha invisible and immortal. He also helps Aengus to drive out his foster father Elamar from his Brug, where Aengus now lives as a god. The underground Brugs are the god's land, in all respects resembling the oversea Elysium, and at once burial places of the euhemerized gods and local forms of the divine land. Professor R.H.YS regards Dagda as an atmospheric god. Dr. McBain sees in him a sky god. More probably, he is an early earth god and a god of agriculture. He has power over corn and milk, and agrees to prevent the other gods from destroying these after their defeat by the Milesians. Former beneficent gods being regarded as hurtful, a not uncommon result of the triumph of a new faith. Dagda is called the god of the earth because of the greatness of his power. Mythical objects associated with him suggest plenty and fertility. His cauldron, which satisfied all comers, his unfailing swine, one always living, the other ready for cooking, a vessel of ale, and 3 trees always laden with fruit. These were in a Cid, where none ever tasted death. Hence a Cid was a local Elysium, not a gloomy land of death, but the underworld in its primitive aspect as the place of gods of fertility. In some myths, he appears with a huge club or fork, and M. Darbois suggests that he may thus be an equivalent of the Gaulish god with a mallet. This is probable, since the Gaulish god may have been a form of Despater, an earth or under-earth god of fertility. If Dagda was a god of fertility, he may have been an equivalent of a god whose image was called Sen or Crom Cruach, head or crooked one of the mound, or bloody head or crescent. Valency, citing a text now lost, says that Cromioka was a name of Dagda, and that a motto at the sacrificial place at Terra read, "Let the altar ever blaze to Dagda." These statements may support this identification. The cult of Crom is preserved in some verses. He was their god, the withered Crom with many mists, to him without glory. They would kill their piteous, wretched offspring, with much wailing and peril, to pour their blood around Crom Cruach, milk and corn. They would ask from him speedily, in return for 1/3 of their healthy issue. Great was the horror and fear of him. To him noble Gaels would prostrate themselves. Elsewhere we learn that this sacrifice in return for the gifts of corn and milk from the god took place at Samhain, and that on one occasion the violent prostrations of the worshippers caused 3/4 of them to die. Again, they beat their palms, they pounded their bodies, they shed falling showers of tears. These are reminiscences of orgiastic rites in which pain and pleasure melt into one. The god must have been a god of fertility. The blood of the victims was poured on the image, the flesh, as in analogous savage rites and folk survivals, may have been buried in the fields to promote fertility. If so, the victim's flesh was instinct with the power of the divinity, and though their number is obviously exaggerated, several victims may have taken the place of an earlier slain representative of the god. A mythic Crom dub, Black Crom, whose festival occurs on the first Sunday in August, may be another form of Crom Cruach. In one story, the name is transferred to S. Patrick's servant, who is asked by the fairies when they will go to paradise. Not till the day of judgment is the answer, and for this they cease to help men in the processes of agriculture. But in a variant Manannan bids Crom ask this question, and the same result follows. These tales thus enshrine the idea that Crom and the fairies were ancient gods of growth who ceased to help men when they deserted them for the Christian faith. If the sacrifice was offered at the August festival, or, as the text suggests, at Samhain after harvest, it must have been on account of the next year's crop, and the flesh may have been mingled with the seed corn. Dagda may thus have been a god of growth and fertility. His wife or mistress was a river goddess, Bone, the Boyne, and the children ascribed to him were Iengus, Bod Dirge, Danu, Bridget, and perhaps Ogma. The Euhemerus made him die of Cephlin's venom, long after the Battle of Magtord, in which he encountered her. Irish mythology is remarkably free from obscene and grotesque myths, but some of these cluster round Dagda. We hear the gargantuan meal provided for him in sport by the Fomorians, in which he ate so much that not easy was it for him to move, and unseemly was his apparel, as well as his conduct with Fomorian beauty. Another amour of his was with Morrigan, the place where it occurred being still known as the couple's bed. In another tale, Dagda acts as cook to Cynner the Great. The beautiful and fascinating Aengus is sometimes called Mac-Indoc, son of the young ones, i.e. Dagda and Bone, or Mac-Oc, the young son. This name, like the myth of his disinheriting his father, may point to his cult superseding that of Dagda. If so, he may then have been affiliated to the older god, as was frequently done in parallel cases, e.g. in Babylon. Aengus may thus have been the high god of some tribe who assumed supremacy, ousting the high god of another tribe, unless we suppose that Dagda was a pre-Celtic god with functions similar to those of Aengus, and that the Celts adopted his cult but gave that of Aengus a higher place. In one myth, the supremacy of Aengus is seen. After the first battle of Magtord, Dagda is forced to become the slave of Bress, and is much annoyed by a lampooner who extorts the best pieces of his rations. Following the advice of Aengus, he not only causes the lampooner's death, but triumphs over the Fomorians, on insufficient grounds, mainly because he was patron of Dermot, beloved of women, and because his kisses became birds which whispered love thoughts to youths and maidens. Aengus has been called the Eros of the Gales. More probably, he was primarily a supreme god of growth, who occasionally suffered eclipse during the time of death in nature, like Tammuz and Adonis, and this may explain his absence from Magtord. The beautiful story of his vision of a maiden with whom he fell violently in love contains too many American formulae to be of any mythological or religious value. His mother Bone caused search to be made for her, but without avail. At last she was discovered to be the daughter of a semi-divine lord of the Cid, but only through the help of mortals was the secret of how she could be taken wrung from him. She was a swan maiden, and on a certain day only would Aengus obtain her. Ultimately, she became his wife. The story is interesting because it shows how the gods occasionally require mortal aid. Equally influenced by American formulae is the story of Aengus and Etain. Etain and Fuamnak were wives of Midir, but Fuamnak was jealous of Etain and transformed her into an insect. In this shape, Aengus found her and placed her in a glass grianan or bower filled with flowers, the perfume of which sustained her. He carried the grianan with him wherever he went, but Fuamnak raised a magic wind which blew Etain away to the roof of Aether, a noble of Ulster. She fell through a smoke hole into a golden cup of wine, and was swallowed by Aether's wife, of whom she was reborn. Professor R.H. Y. S. resolves all this into a sun and dawn myth. Aengus is the sun, Etain the dawn, the grianan the expanse of sky. But the dawn does not grow stronger with the sun's influence, as Etain did under that of Aengus. At the sun's appearance, the dawn begins. To faint in the light of the sun she loves, to faint in his light and to die. The whole story is built up on the well-known American formulae of the true bride and the two brothers, but accommodated to well-known mythic personages, and the grianan is the Celtic equivalent of various objects in stories of Cinderella type, in which the heroine conceals herself, the object being bought by the hero and kept in his room. Thus the tale reveals nothing of Etain's divine functions, but illustrates a method of the mythological school in discovering sun heroes and dawn maidens in any incident, mythical or not. Aengus appears in the Finn cycle as the fosterer and protector of Dermot. With Midir, Bob, and Morgan, he expels the Fomorians when they destroy the corn, fruit, and milk of the Tuatha Dé Danann. This may point to his functions as a god of fertility, although Midir appears mainly as a king of the side and ruler of the Brug of Breleith. He is also connected with the Tuatha Dé, learning that Etain had been reborn and was now married to King Eochaid. He recovered her from him, but lost her again when Eochaid attacked his Brug. He was ultimately avenged in the series of tragic events which led to the death of Eochaid's descendant Conair. Though his city is located in Ireland, it has so much resemblance to Elysium that Midir must be regarded as one of its lords. Hence he appears as ruler of the Isle of Falga, i.e. the Isle of Man regarded as Elysium. Thence his daughter Blathnat, his magical cows and cauldron, were stolen by Cuchulainn and Curoy, and his 3 cranes from Breleith by Aethin 293. perhaps distorted versions of the myths which told how various animals and gifts came from the god's land. Midr may be the Irish equivalent of a local Gaulish god, Medros, depicted on bas-reliefs with a cow or bull. The victory of the OldAethelred at the First Battle of Magtord in June, their victory followed, however, by the deaths of many of them at the Second Battle in November, may point to old myths dramatizing the phenomena of nature and connected with the ritual of summer and winter festivals. The powers of light and growth are in the ascendant in summer. They seem to die in winter. Christian humorists made use of these myths, but regard the gods as warriors who were slain, not as those who die and revive again. At the second battle, Nuada loses his life. At the first, though his forces are victorious, his hand was cut off by the Fomorian Shreng. For even when victorious, the gods must suffer. A silver hand was made for him by Dionsect, and hence he was called Nuada Argilim, of the silver hand. Professor R.H.Y.S. regards him as a Celtic Zeus, partly because he is king of the Tuatha Danann, partly because he, like Zeus or Tyr, who lost tendons or a hand to the wiles of evil gods, is also maimed. Similarly, in the Rig Veda, the Akvins substitute a leg of iron for the leg of Vespala, cut off in battle, and the sun is called golden-handed, because Savitri cut off his hand, and the priest replaced it by one of gold. The myth of Nuada's hand may have arisen from primitive attempts at replacing lopped-off limbs, as well as from the fact that no Irish king must have any bodily defect, or possibly because an image of Nuada may have lacked a hand or possessed one of silver. Images were often maimed or given artificial limbs, and myths then arose to explain the custom. Nuada appears to be a god of life and growth, but he is not a sun god. His Welsh equivalent is Lud Laurine, or Silver-Handed, who delivers his people from various scourges. His daughter Cradilad is to be wedded to Gwythyr, but is kidnapped by Gwyn. Arthur decides that they must fight for her yearly on May 1st until the Day of Judgment, when a victor would gain her hand. Professor R.H.Y.S. regards Cradilad as a Persephone, wedded alternately to light and dark divinities. But the story may rather be explanatory of such ritual acts as are found in folk survivals in the form of fights between summer and winter, in which a queen of May figures, and intended to assist the conflict of the gods of growth with those of blight. Cradilad is daughter of a probable god of growth, nor is it impossible that the story of the Battle of Magtord is based on mythic explanations of such ritual combats. The Britons worshipped Nuada as No-Dons in Romano-British times. The remains of his temple exist near the mouth of the Severn, and the god may have been equated with Mars, though certain symbols seem to connect him with the waters as a kind of Neptune. An Irish mythic poet Nuada Necht may be the Necton who owned a magic well whence issued the Boyne, and was perhaps a water god. If such a water god was associated with Nuada, he and No-Dons might be a Celtic Neptune. But the relationship and functions of these various personages are obscure, nor is it certain that No-Dons was equated with Neptune or that Nuada was a water god. His name may be cognate with words meaning growth, possession, harvest, and this supports a view taken here as functions. The Welsh Nudhale, or the generous, who possess a herd of milch kine, may be a memory of this god, and it is possible that, as a god of growth, Nuada had human incarnations called by his name. Lur, whose name means sea, and who was a god of the sea, is father Manannan, as well as of the personages of the beautiful story called the Children of Lyre, from which we learn practically all that is known of him. He resented not being made ruler of the Tuatha Dé, but was later reconciled when the daughter of Bod Dirge was given to him as his wife. On her death, he married her sister, who transformed her stepchildren into swans. Lur is the equivalent of the Brythonic Elowar, later immortalized by Shakespeare as King Lear. The greatness of Manannan Mac Lir, son of the sea, is proved by the fact that he appears in many of the heroic tales, and is still remembered in tradition and folk tale. He is a sea god who has become more prominent than the older god of the sea, and though not a supreme god, he must have had a far-spreading cult. With Bod Dirge, he was elected king of the Tuatha Dé Danann. He made the gods invisible and immortal, gave them magical food, and assisted Aengus in driving out Elamar from his Cid. Later tradition spoke of 4 Manannans, probably local forms of the god, as is suggested by the fact that the true name of one of them is said to be Orbsin, son of Olat. Another, the son of Lur, is described as a renowned trader who dwelt in the Isle of Man, the best of pilots, weather-wise, and able to transform himself as he pleased. The Coir Ammon adds that the Britons and the men of Erin deemed him god of the sea. That position is plainly seen in many tales, e.g. in the magnificent passage of the Voyage of Bran, where he suddenly sweeps into sight, riding in a chariot across the waves on the land of promise, or in the tale of Cuchulain's sickness, where his wife Fan sees him, the horseman of the crested sea, coming across the waves. In the Egalum na Senarak, he appears as a cavalier breasting the waves. For the space of 9 waves he would be submerged in the sea, but would rise on the crest of the 10th without wetting chest or breast. In one archaic tale, he is identified with a great sea wave which swept away Tuag, while the waves are sometimes called the son of Lyre's horses, a name still current in Ireland, or again, the locks of Manannan's wife. His position as god of the sea may have given rise to the belief that he was ruler of the oversea Elysium, and later of the otherworld as a magical domain coterminous with this earth. He is still remembered in the Isle of Man, which may owe its name to him, and which, like many another island, was regarded by the Goidels as the island Elysium under its name of Isle of Falga. He is also the Manawyddan of Welsh story. Manannan appears in the Cuchulainn and Finn cycles, usually as a ruler of the other world. His wife Fan was Cuchulainn's mistress. Dermot was his pupil in Fairyland, and Cormac was his guest there. Even in Christian times, surviving pagan beliefs caused legend to be busy with his name. King Fiachna was fighting the Scots and in great danger, when a stranger appeared to his wife and announced that he would save her husband's life if she would consent to abandon herself to him. She reluctantly agreed, and the child of the Amur was the 7th century King Mongan, of whom the annalist says, "Everyone knows that his real father was Manannan." Mongan was also believed to be a rebirth of Finn. Manannan is still remembered in folk tradition, and in the Isle of Man, where his grave is to be seen, some of his rituals survived until lately, bundles of rushes being placed for him on Midsummer Eve on 2 hills. Barintus, who steers Arthur to Fortunate Isles, and Esbari, who crossed the sea on horseback, may have been legendary forms of a local sea god akin to Manannan, or of Manannan himself. His steed was Imbar, water foam or hair, and Manannan was the horseman of the main sea. Barintus, perhaps connected with Bar Find, white-topped, would thus be a surname of the god who rode on Imbar, the foaming wave, or was himself the wave, while his mythic sea riding was transferred to the legend of Esbari, if such a person ever existed. Various magical possessions were ascribed to Manannan: his armor and sword, the one making the wearer invulnerable, the other terrifying all who beheld it, his horse and canoe, his swine, which came to life again when killed, his magic cloak, his cup which broke when a lie was spoken, his tablecloth which, when waved, produced food. Many of these are found everywhere in American, and there is nothing peculiarly Celtic in them. We need not, therefore, with the mythologist, see in his armor the vapory clouds, or in his sword lightning or the sun's rays. But their magical nature, as well as the fact that so much wizardry is attributed to Manannan, points to a copious mythology clustering round the god, now forever lost. The parentage of Lug is differently stated, but that account which makes him son of Cian and of Ethne, daughter of Baelor, is best attested. Folk tradition still recalls a relation of Lug and Baelor. Baelor, a robber living in Tory Island, had a daughter whose son was to kill her father. He therefore shut her up in an inaccessible place, but in revenge of Baelor stealing McAneely's cow, the latter gained access to her, with the result that Ethne bore 3 sons, whom Baelor cast into the sea. One of them, Lug, was recovered by McAneely and fostered by his brother Gavida. Baelor now slew McAneely, but was himself slain by Lug, who pierced his single eye with a red-hot iron. In another version, Cian takes McAneely's place and is aided by Manannan, in accordance with older legends. But Lug's birth story has been influenced in these tales by the American formula of the girl hidden away, because it has been foretold that she will have a son who will slay her father. Lug is associated with Manannan, from whose land he comes to assist the Tuatha Dé against the Fomorians. His appearance was that of the sun, and by this brilliant warrior's prowess the hosts were utterly defeated. This version, found in the Children of Twyrin, differs from the account in the story of Mag-Tuord. Here Lug arrives at the gates of Terra and offers his services as a craftsman. Each offer is refused until he proclaims himself the man of each and every art, or Samoldanak, possessing many arts. Nuada resigns his throne to him for 13 days, and Lug passes in review the various craftsmen, i.e. the gods, and though they try to prevent such a marvelous person risking himself in the fight, he escapes, heads the warriors, and sings his war song. Balor, the evil-eyed, he slays with a sling stone, and his death decided the day against the Fomorians. In this account, Lug Samoldanak is a patron of the divine patrons of crafts. In other words, he is superior to a whole group of gods. He was also inventor of drafts, ball play, and horsemanship. But as Darbois shows, Samoldanak is the equivalent of inventor of all arts, applied by Caesar to the Gallo-Roman Mercury, who is thus an equivalent of Lug. This is attested on other grounds. As Lug's name appears in Irish Louth, Lugmath, and in British Luguvalum, near Hadrian's Wall, so in Gaul the names Lugudunum, lions, Lugudiacus, and Lugselva, devoted to Lugus, show that a god Lugus was worshipped there. A Gaulish feast of Lugus in August, the month of Lug's festival in Ireland, was perhaps superseded by one in honor of Augustus. No dedication to Lugus has yet been found, but images of and inscriptions to Mercury abound at Lugudunum Convenarum, as there were 3 Bridgets. So there may have been several forms of Lugus, and 2 dedications to the Lugos have been found in Spain and Switzerland, one of them inscribed by the shoemakers of Oxama. Thus the Lugos may have been multiplied forms of Lugus, or Lugovos, a hero, the meaning given to Lug by Odovorin. Shoemaking was not one of the arts professed by Lug, but Professor R. West recalls the fact that the Welsh Low, whom he equates with Lug, disguised himself as a shoemaker. Lugus, besides being a mighty hero, was a great Celtic culture god, superior to all other culture divinities. The Euhemerus assigned a definite date to Lug's death, but side by side with this a memory of his divinity prevailed, and he appears as the father and helper of Cuchulainn, who was possibly a rebirth of the god. His high position appears in the fact that the Gaulish assembly at Lugudunum was held in his honor, like the festival of Lugnasad in Ireland. Craftsmen brought their wares to sell at this festival of the god of crafts, while it may also have been a harvest festival. Whether it was a strictly solar feast is doubtful, though Professor R.H. YS and others insist that Lug is a sun god. The name of the Welsh Low, light, is equated with Lug, and the same meaning assigned to the latter. This equation has been contested, and is doubtful, Lugus probably meaning hero. Still, the sun-like traits ascribed to Lug before Mag-Tuord suggest that he was a sun god, and solar gods elsewhere, e.g. the Polynesian Maui, are culture gods as well. But it should be remembered that Lug is not associated with the true solar festivals of Beltane and Midsummer. While our knowledge of the Tuatha Dé Danann is based upon a series of mythic tales and other records, that of the gods of the continental Celts, apart from a few notices in classical authors and elsewhere, comes from inscriptions. But as far as can be judged, though the names of the 2 groups seldom coincide, their functions must have been much alike, and their origins certainly the same. The Tuatha Dé Danann were nature divinities of growth, light, agriculture, their symbols and possessions suggesting fertility, e.g. the cauldron. They were divinities of culture and crafts, and of war. There must have been many other gods in Ireland than those described here, while some of those may not have been worshipped all over Ireland. Generally speaking, there were many local gods in Gaul with similar functions but different names, and this may have been true of Ireland. Perhaps the different names given to Dagda, Manannan, and others were simply names of similar local gods, one of whom became prominent, and attracted himself the names of the others. So, too, the identity of Danu and Bridget might be explained, or the fact that there were 3 Bridgets. We read also in the text of the god of Connaught, or of Ulster, and these were apparently regional divinities, or the god of Druidism, perhaps a god worshipped specially by Druids. The remote origin of some of these divinities may be sought in the primitive cult of the earth personified as a fertile being, and in that of vegetation and corn spirits, and the vague spirits of nature in all its aspects. Some of these still continued to be worshipped when the greater gods had been evolved. Though animal worship was not lacking in Ireland, divinities who are anthropomorphic forms of earlier animal gods are less in evidence than on the continent. The divinities of culture, crafts, and war, and of departments of nature, must have slowly assumed the definite personality assigned them in Irish religion. But, doubtless, they already possessed that before the Goidels reached Ireland. Strictly speaking, the underground domain assigned later to the Tuatha Dé Danann belongs only to such of them as were associated with fertility. But in course of time, most of the group, as underground dwellers, were connected with growth and increase. These could be blighted by their enemies, or they themselves could withhold them when their worshippers offended them. Irish mythology points to the early preeminence of goddesses. As agriculture and many of the arts were first in the hands of women, goddesses of fertility and culture preceded gods, and still held their place when gods were evolved. Even war goddesses are prominent in Ireland. Celtic gods and heroes are often called after their mothers, not their fathers, and women loom largely in the tales of Irish colonization, while in many legends they play a most important part. Goddesses give their name to divine groups, and even where gods are prominent, their actions are free, their personalities still clearly defined. The supremacy of the divine women of Irish tradition is once more seen in the fact that they themselves woo and win heroes, while their capacity for love, their passion, their eternal youthfulness and beauty are suggestive of their early character as goddesses of ever-springing fertility. This supremacy of goddesses is explained by Professor Arch Carrotwitz as non-Celtic, as borrowed by the Celts from the Aborigines. But it is too deeply impressed on the fabric of Celtic tradition to be other than native, and we have no reason to suppose that the Celts had not passed through a stage in which such a state of things was normal. Their innate conservatism caused them to preserve it more than other races who had long outgrown such a state of things. Now, thank you for listening, and we hope we help you to get some sleep. If you are still awake, why don't you try another video?